So let's get rolling. We have about an hour, I guess. My name is John Harity. I'm an advisor to the Canadian Business and Biodiversity Council. I spent 30-some years with Environment Canada working on both environmental assessment and biodiversity issues. The last 14 years have been with the Biodiversity Convention and our work in that. And then I spent a few years with IUCN, running their Canada office when they had one here. Now I'm enjoying retirement. I'm earning my pension. This is about sustainable public procurement, and this is one of the most influential buying activities that there can be with respect to sustainable production and sustainable buying. It's about ensuring that products and services purchased by a government are as sustainable as possible, both in the sense of the lowest possible environmental impact as well as producing the most positive social impacts. Due to a significant impact on the economy, public sector procurement is a major contributor to environmental growth and stability across a wide range of sectors, and it provides finances and contracts that can help drive markets for goods and services. A number of initiatives, studies underway in this area, including traditional procurement as well as public-private partnerships, which are becoming increasingly popular. This panel is going to discuss some of that work and where sustainable public procurement policies currently stand and where they may be headed. In addition, the panel will discuss how businesses can both benefit from these policies and perhaps help to influence them in the future. Our keynote speaker, Gabrielle Candra, is not able to be with us this morning, but has been ably replaced by his Marisa Luisa Del Rio Mispireta. But first I want to say that it is Gabrielle's presentation that she will be giving. So that's what you will be seeing, and his inability to be here was rather unexpected, including by Maria Luisa. Gabrielle has been Vice Minister of Strategic Development of Natural Resources in the Ministry of Environment for Peru for a number of years, since 2011, and is an expert in design, implementation, and evaluation of international financial and technical cooperation, with an emphasis on bilateral, multilateral, and private research-oriented policy design, training, and consulting. His academic work was at the University of the Pacific. So that's Gabriel. Maria Luisa is an advisor to him, to the Vice Minister. She is a biologist and a former Director General of Biodiversity for the Ministry of Environment in Peru before taking on this current responsibility. So I'll call on Maria Luisa to give our keynote presentation. Oops.
Good morning. Thank you. On behalf of the Minister of Environment, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, and on behalf of my boss, Vice Minister Gabriel Quijandría, we want to thank this invitation to talk about the current status of the sustainable public procurement in Peru, the challenge, barriers, and some proposals for implementing or better implementation. As you know, by the first, the time for ignoring biodiversity as a means of regenerating wealth and as a pillar of the global economy is long gone. We must rethink our traditional models of economic growth in order to accept the challenge of moving towards a new economy. The world's mega-diverse countries like Peru are walking onto this new stage with a comparative global advantage and possibilities, but with a really huge challenge towards to change the public sector visions. As said our former speaker, government as usual is not enough, and we are on the way about this. This is the content of my presentations: general overview of Peru, measures and initiatives adopted, measures adopted into the ministry, and some key issues for discussion. As a general overview of Peru, as you know, Peru is the fourth megadevice country. We are in worlds of ecosystem and species diversity and genetic resources. This fact places the country in an advantageous position in international markets for creating new jobs, and in the main task for the well-being and the improve the quality of life and reducing poverty of our populations. This is the you know, and the second picture that I want to present to you is this one, this image, this document elaborated with different sources about goods and service from ecosystem goods and services, from the economic appraisal of Peru's biodiversity and ecosystem services, data from the Research Central Bank of Peru and the Ministry of Tourism, and from fisheries, to show all the goods, for example, organic bananas, cotton, organic coffee, organic cocoa, and the evaluation made from the Upper Andean wetlands, Amazonian forests, Upper Andean grassland, and Amazonian valleys. And on the right side of these presentations, you can see all the goods and services that we are on the way to protect or to improve for our population, for the people, and for the well-being of our people. But this is true. But what we are doing from the government is especially related to sustainable public procurement, is what I want to present to you. And by the first, as you can see in the upside, in the up of this slide, there is a logo from Biodiversity, Business and Biodiversity. This is a Peruvian initiative that we are working now with business and NGOs and academic, and organized and promoted by the Ministry of Environment, and this is the leitmotif of that are in our mind. We need innovative, efficient, competitive, socially responsible companies, and this is the way where public policy should focus. These are the companies that should be supported and promoted by public and private sector. This was extracted from the document When We Awake in 2062. Visions of Peru in 50 years is a very important document from the Pacific University and from 10 people that we are engaging in this initiative. Well, in our context, in the Peruvian context, there is two keywords related to sustainable public procurement: to lead by example. This is very important because we need to demonstrate to our population, to private sector, to civil society, that we are engaged in the sustainability, to lead by example. This strengthens confidence in Peru. But we are in the beginning of this. We are in the beginning. Just brief conceptual framework. We are talking about public expenditure and public environment expenditure in Peru. But we think that SPP will be very helpful for mainstreaming biodiversity with 3 pillars: economic, social, and environment, as you know. But in Peru, we are like the situation now. It's very strong economic criteria. There are very strong social criteria, but environmental criteria is not working yet. We are working and we are engaging to Ministry of Economy, but this goes very slow. There is a slight growth related to this. This is the new functional classifier in Peru. This is public environment expenditure, as you can see. The functional classifier in environmental means this is the public investment of public institutions in Peru. For example, from national to regional to sub-regional to local public institutions must or to have include all their projects, activities, actions, programs in this functional classifier. As you can see, number 17, environmental, and 2 programs: strategic development, conservation, and sustainable use of natural heritage, and integral management of environmental quality. All public sector that are working in environmental issues like land management, climate change management, conservation of biodiversity, integral monitoring and control of pollution, have to include their programs over there in this functional classifier. This is a new program launched on 2012, and we are working and trying to adapt all our programs and projects in this framework. Talking about share of public environment expenditure on public expenditure, as you can see, there is a slight growth. It's very, very slight. We think that one of the causes that is a slight growth is because the regulation, the public expenditure regulation that prioritize the infrastructure and building of infrastructure in our country versus environmental issues or conservation of biodiversity. But we are going on the path of sustainability. This is the share of public environment expenditure. As you can see, is a very, very little, 0.4% of PEE in gross domestic product. And related to sustainable public procurement, we are engaged with the Ministry of Finance and of Economic and Finance about this criteria. This criteria, as you know, criteria relationship between price, quality, and impartiality of procurement procedures. Many of these criteria are in an early stage in Peru. Some of them are in progress, in more progress than others, but not applied to all public procurement in the country. There is some of them that are applying, for example, reduced consumption of resources, supporting the social economy. There is a very big program of social inclusion in Peru, supporting products and fair trade organization as an alternative. Our social programs are engaging are in the process for engaging the producers, organic producers, and gastronomy, and expenditure, public expenditure. But we are going very slow at this time. This I want to show you some green growth initiatives. The first is the most important for us, National Public Investment System Green. These formulate projects related to ecosystem services and biodiversity. We are working together with the ministry and some regional governments with the projects in Peru. Environmental national accounting. We are in the beginning about this. We are formulating some criteria and some guidelines and some pilot projects related to this, in coordination with some international organizations like World Bank, CIPAL, and with MEF. MEF is the signals of Ministry of Economy and Finance, and INEI is the National Institute for Statistics. We are engaged in two projects, WAVE projects and EVA projects. I think you know both of the projects, you know about this. And our National Forest Conservation Program for the mitigation of climate change, that is engaged to protect the permanent protection of 54 million hectares of forests, and supporting indigenous people and promoting new sustainable activities. Now is launching a new period of this program. Biofin, this is pilot global project from financing biodiversity. EcoTrade, this program policy support is with the support, financial support of European Union, and PACE and peer-to-peer program for an inclusive and sustainable development in Latin fiscal policy. This is some examples. I talk about some of them in the next slides. A strategic plan of public procurement, a guide for eco-efficiency for sector public institutions. These are some examples of common eco-labels in public procurement. You know some of them. And we are trying to choose the better suppliers that are engaged in these eco-labels. Measures and initiatives adopted in Peru. This is a Supreme decree signed by the President. Eco-efficiency measure for public sector is from the 29th year, and there is a special article 7 of this law that are talking about the saving of public spending with sustainability with eco-efficiency measures. In the following years, until 2012, the consideration of this measure for public sector are reflected in the additional provisions of the budget laws now. This is a eco-efficiency guide for public sector institutions, also provides a list of suppliers of clean energy, water, office supplies, and all the institutions or public institutions have to report the implementation of this guide and all of these measures, eco-efficiency measures, year by year. Talking about agreements and cooperation, South-South cooperation, or with another countries that are going in a good way in SPP, there is an agreement between OCE, this is our agency for the state procurement, and Chile Compras. And there is a special article on to generate tools for improving and standardizing sustainable procurement, with 2 projects: technical cooperation between Chile and Peru, and another one in the stage of evaluation, stimulating demand and supply of sustainable products. And into the ministry, we have a directive, a special directive for promoting eco-efficiency policy measures in the ministry. And we also report to the President of the Republic. Well, related key issues. We think that there is now a lack of an agreed definition of sustainable public procurement. Even Peru approved this supreme decree related to a state procurement law and guiding principles. There is in the Article 4 there is one guiding principle linked to sustainability, but it's a principle. The practical implementation is situated in an initial phase. There is no criteria now. Implement sustainable criteria. We are working with this in public procurement made by government social programs like Kali Warma. This is for nutrition for children and community kitchens, among others. But we think that we need to promote environmental sustainable criteria in a specific interinstitutional agreements on public procurement. Learning from projects implemented in international experience for us is very important. And the most important for us to build the sustainable, not only sustainable public procurement, that on sustainable supply chain. We need to engage more stakeholders on how to do this. We need to learn from experience. We're here to learn from your experiences. It's important for us capacity building on sustainable by enhanced cooperation between countries. There is very good experiences. Costa Rica, Brazil, Chile share experiences, and studies and analysis on legislation, market availability, and appropriate technology. Market analysis for the supply chain in the public sector is the most important for us. And this is, we are presenting, I am presenting on behalf of my Vice Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria Luisa, for standing in for Gabriel. Our next speaker is from the Government of Canada. She is Margaret Bailey from the Office of Greening Government Operations in the Public Works and Government Services Department. She's the lead policy analyst for green procurement in this department. She's had 6 years experience working on a wide variety of green procurement issues for the Government of Canada. She currently supports the government-wide implementation of the policy on green procurement and the green procurement targets in the Federal Sustainable Development Strategy. Margaret?
So yes, I'm with the Office of Greening Government Operations. We lead the government-wide implementation of green procurement in the federal government. An outline on my presentation, I'll talk to you a little bit about our policy, how we implement it, the high-level approach, how we operationalize it a little bit, and then some of our lessons learned. There's time at the end. I'll talk about some of the additional resources that we have that you can reference. So we have a policy. It came into effect in 2006. The objective of the policy is to integrate environmental considerations into the procurement decision-making process and support sustainable development. We do focus in this policy only on the environmental issues and considerations. The social aspects of sustainable public procurement are handled by other organizations within the federal government. So it's not ignored, but it's not included under the same umbrella. We do implement green procurement within the context of value for money, where environmental impact and environmental considerations are considered a value among many others. So it is a balancing issue that there are many values to public procurement, and the environment is one of them. We do also emphasize the life cycle approach to procurement, so not just looking at, for instance, energy efficiency. That's one aspect of the life cycle, but there's also how it was manufactured, how it will be disposed of, etc. So at every turn, as much as we can, we try and examine the whole life cycle of a product or service. There are no additional funds to implement green procurement within the Government of Canada. So it is done within existing reference levels, is how we say that. And what that means in terms of implementation is that we do, as much as possible, integrate into existing processes. It's also helpful, we find, to integrate into the existing processes in the sense that then it becomes part of business as usual, as opposed to siloed, oh, there's the special green people over there. Green procurement is something that everyone involved in procurement needs to be thinking about. We do look at governance issues and engagement as well to make sure that we're leveraging those. So activities that we do have centralized purchasing. Not everything is purchased centrally. We do have a bit of a mixed model. There is some fair amount of decentralized, but for goods and services that are bought across all federal government departments, or even just a few of them, there are central tools put in place by my department. And so our first step, for our first priority for implementing green procurement, is to look at those central tools and make sure that there are environmentally preferable options in those, and preferably that everything on that particular centralized procurement instrument is environmentally preferable in some way. That's our first priority in implementation. We also have a very robust planning and reporting process. So we're calling, it's the reports on plans and priorities for the planning side, and then departmental performance reports on the reporting side. These are done annually, so all departments must set targets related to training, their processes and controls, performance evaluations, and then also for specific goods and services. As much as possible, we leverage industry standards and certifications, eco-labels. This makes it much, much easier for our procurement officers to know what is environmentally preferable and what isn't, which is always a moving target. So that's always the challenge, and the standards really help us with that. We develop and share information and tools, and we also have what we're calling a federal sustainable development strategy, which is much larger than green procurement. It's much larger than even government operations, but we do leverage that existing instrument to further green procurement. So in terms of what advice we give to procurement officers, how on the ground they actually implement green procurement, we do, again, go back to the life cycle approach. We have planning, acquisition, use, and disposal. The planning and the acquisition stages are very much about reduction, reducing your consumption, reducing the packaging, the paper, the transportation, making sure to apply green principles to services as well. And then the use and disposal are very much about the reuse and recycling as much as possible. Extending the life through warranties and repairs, and reusing within government, donating, recycling, etc. An element that sometimes gets forgotten in green procurement that we do try to emphasize is defining the need for procurement, making sure that you're meeting the need without exceeding it. There's always a temptation, for example, with vehicles. If you're buying a truck because once a year you need a truck as opposed to a compact vehicle, then that's exceeding your need. You can, for that one occasion where you need a towing capacity or whatever it is about a truck, then you can rent for that occasion, but you don't need it the rest of the year. So that's one example. So lessons learned, things that we've experienced in implementing green procurement over the last 7 years is that it's a challenge to maintain competition while introducing green procurement criteria. It's not impossible, but it is a challenge in that not every good or service, there might only be one supplier that can meet the criteria, in which case we need to open it up a little bit more so that we have more suppliers able to compete on any given request for proposal. We're constantly balancing environmental objectives with other procurement objectives. So again, with the value for money, it's not just environmental considerations that are valued. There are many others, and we can't always please everything. So the policy, it says to consider the environment. It doesn't say that you must buy the greenest, best product, because there are other considerations that we work within. Now the federal government, we do buy a lot, we do spend a fair amount, but we also buy a lot of different things, and there's lots of different people involved in each of those goods and service areas. So it's a challenge in the sense of, you know, we don't always have market influence for a particular good or service. We can't always connect and train every single person along the chain that might make a decision. And we do have issues, or not issues, but challenges with collaboration horizontally with all these different people across all these different goods and services, and to engage them all at all levels. So success factors, these are ways that we address the challenges that we face. We do have Center of Expertise. This is Public Works and Government Services, where we're the ones who develop the training, the governance, the guides, materials, and tools to try and facilitate all of this implementation. And we address all the centralized procurement instruments. So we're the department that puts them together. So we're also the department that makes sure that green procurement is addressed in them, and that automatically addresses a lot of the procurement that departments make. It's about 80% of our spend is through the centralized instruments. So a second success factor is that we don't just have one small group in Public Works that addresses green procurement. We have two major players within the department. One is the group that I represent, the Office of Green and Government Operations. We're the policy side, we're the high-level training guidance side. And then we also have a green procurement team and acquisitions branch who operationalize all the guidance in the centralized instruments. So a split roles we found has been very helpful in terms of implementation. Another success factor I mentioned earlier, we have a federal sustainable development strategy, which is a global document, and we do leverage that process to implement green procurement. That's been very successful. And the last point, perhaps should have been first, it's a phased and principles-based approach. So this is what I was talking about earlier with the life cycle assessment, and that for principles is that as much as possible, We go back to first principles, reduce, reuse, recycle, looking at a holistic perspective of a good or service. So we're not just looking at energy efficiency, we're not just looking at sustainable forestry management, we're not just looking at e-waste, we're looking at all of it as much as possible. And of course a phased approach, that we can't do everything at once, although the policy does apply to all goods, all services, everything we buy from every corner of government. It does apply realistically in terms of implementation. We don't do everything at once. So that's been a success factor in terms of getting movement forward on implementing green procurement. So we do have some additional resources. We do have a website for the policy perspective, information about our policy, questions and answers. There's a toolkit available. We also have the buyandsell.gc.ca/green site. So this is the more operational site where you can get step-by-step guides on specific goods and services, how to make sure to integrate environmental considerations in them. The green scorecards are what the Government of Canada is doing for specific goods and services, outlining what we did for the last solicitation, what we're doing for the current one, and what we're planning for the future for each good and service, so that industry can adjust and make plans. There's also access to the green standing offers, supply arrangements, and master contracts, so that's the actual criteria that's included in all of them. We do have training, online training, and we do have an internal wiki on green procurement. Both of those are only accessible to federal government employees, but if anyone's interested in seeing our training material, please let me know, and I can share that with you. And my contact information is there, as well as the contact information for my partner in acquisitions branch, who can answer more of the operational if you're thinking about a specific good or service. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Next speaker was to be Anne-Marie Saulnier from the Quebec Multi-Stakeholder Platform, but Anne-Marie is unable to be with us this morning. And I have the great pleasure of being able to introduce my old friend Jean-Pierre Everett. Jean-Pierre has a master's and PhD from the University of Clermont in France on environmental and natural resources, and postgraduate degree in applied ecology from the University of Orléans there. He joined UQAM, the University du Québec at Montreal, in 1979, and is a professor in the Department of Strategy and Corporate Social Responsibility there. He's co-holder of the International Chair in Life Cycle Analysis at leading research center, CIRAG, and vice president of Groupe Agico, a consulting firm for socioeconomic analysis of the food and agri-food sector, natural resources and environment. And I have to add that I can clearly remember, I don't know if Jean-Pierre can, our getting together about 20 years ago when I was with the Department of Environment and sent Jean-Pierre off to a number of West African countries to do some public policy research there about how they were looking at the early days of implementation of the Biodiversity Convention, to feed back information to us and see if we could be helpful in that regard. And it was like a working holiday. I don't know whether you remember that or not, but that was good fun. We enjoyed that too. Jean-Pierre Everett.
Thank you very much, John. And these 20 years back show that we're still working on the same issues, they're progressing, and at the time you were really working on the limits of implementing the focal points in the context of the convention in Africa in particular. So I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to share a few ideas with you, and replacing Anne-Marie Saunier, who is the director and founder of this Quebec initiative. That's the Quebec Multi-Stakeholder Platform on Responsible Purchasing. And I don't have slides. We discussed with her and she said, no, there is no plan for slides, so I'm sorry for that. I just share ideas, but no images. Before I get into the practice of that center, or that platform as we call it, I want to say a few words on how it started, because I think we're dealing with questions where processes are very important. Good ideas are one thing, but putting them into practice is also very important. And so this platform, which plays now an important role in these debates and implementation of responsible procurements in the province of Quebec, is a follow-up of a conference that took place in the late 2007, I think, where a large audience coming from private sector, public sector, came to debate and hear specialists on responsible procurement and supply chain management in a more sustainable development way, etc., etc. And as it happened sometime at the end of the conference, someone said, well, let's not leave it here. We seem to have a number of common points that have been raised, that whether you're working in a large private company or government or municipality, we're facing very similar issues, and why don't we get together again? And this other motto, which is sort of simple but very strong, it had been analyzed somewhere, and we know it, that alone you don't do very much, but by joining forces you can really make a difference. And it's so true in purchasing policies, because it can have an influence. So within a year after that conference, a large number of key actors got back together and created that platform, which after now 5-6 years has more than 30 formal organizations into it. I'll get in more detail, but a very interesting very different categories of actors together. But one key figure, I think, is all together they do represent more than $20 billion of purchasing power annually. So it's not something that, it doesn't mean that all those purchases are done with the right approach, but it's there, and there is the potential of changing things. So what you will find in the platform is a number of large enterprises, companies, Alcoa in aluminium, Bell, the telephone company, Le Cirque du Soleil, which is maybe smaller than others, but acting as a leader in the field. I guess all you know the Cirque du Soleil. It's a very international circus based in Montreal. Gaz Metro, the Desjardins banking movement, Rona, etc. But you also have a number of state companies like Hydro-Québec, Loto-Québec, the Liquor Board of Quebec, etc. Then you have the whole network of universities under the umbrella of their higher level of coordination, of organization, which is CREPUC. And then a number of public organisms like the Transport Society for the City of Montreal, Public Works and Government Services of Canada, my neighbor here, and a number of cities in the province of Quebec. And then on top of those initial partners, you have a number of what we call stakeholders. And those stakeholders will be NGOs who have an interest in promoting sustainable procurement. And they can be either environmental NGOs, like Equiterre, for example, or they can be the coalition for fighting against sweatshops, for example. And sweatshops all the way down along a supply chain or a life cycle of a product. So 5, 6, 7 of those NGOs, and a number of governmental bodies like Recycling Quebec or the Sustainable Development Coordination Bureau for Quebec City. And then a number of research institutes, private consulting firms who act as either advisors or contribute to the thinking process in all that. So now the system exists, it works, it has a formal and pretty good website, and it produces a series of documents and strategies and all that. So the mission is really to promote sustainable development perspective through the supply chain management. That's really the center. And then the sub-elements of the mission is capacity development. There is a very big gap at this level. It's not taken care of by universities, so there is a specific field for capacity development through webinars, through workshops, etc., etc. Then to influence and favor research and pilot projects to innovate in the field. And there are very practical research projects being carried out in the universities around through that influence. Then mobilizing actors of the supply chain around those large principles. That is, I could say it's sort of giving a life to a supply chain. I remember a comment from one of our company partners at the chair. He said, well, for me, it's just a series of orders, purchasing orders. But it's people behind that at each level of the supply chain, and it's to create life, I would say, in a way, so that there is a spirit there. May sound theoretical, but it changes from just papers on the chain. And so this mobilization, and then measuring progress. That's a very important aspect of how does it move? Are we doing something that gets somewhere? So the benefits that people have from being part of ECPAR now is that because of a sort of a permanent technological watch or business intelligence, whatever how we call it, which is done by the team at ECPAR or by students that we get there with ECPAR, it gives access to a database of very practical tools, how to include those elements in your own purchasing strategy. They benefit from the training that I mentioned, and they also have a sort of immediate answer type of system where you can ask questions to the community and the answer will come back to you rapidly. So I won't get into the other details of the benefits in terms of information and all that. I would like now to quickly switch to two things. The link between purchasing, procurement, responsible procurement, and life cycle assessment, life cycle analysis, and biodiversity. From the very beginning, the influence of our research center, where I'm co-holder of the chair on life cycle assessment, was involved in all the thinking process of that group, and it was really structured around a life cycle thinking perspective. And we all know that a supply chain fits very well within the spirit of life cycle assessment, but life cycle assessment will work on a system that's wider, it goes further, and it really matches, and we see that life cycle assessment is a good tool to help implement such an approach. And as we don't have the same constraints as governments, we have the opportunity to handle both the environment and socio-economic aspects at the same time. So we do have work in the group on environmental aspects and therefore biodiversity, but also on socio-economic aspects that could very well be linked to biodiversity as we know. So it's sort of seen as natural to get that perspective. Now, If life cycle assessment looks at environmental issues, it does look also at biodiversity. But those who know more about life cycle assessment will know that it's not the environmental component that is the best, considered in the best way in LCA. Carbon, climate change issues are better tackled than biodiversity, which is very often limited to change of land use, for example, but not very rich into variables that are taken care. So it opened a research field that we have at the chair on how to include ecological goods and services perspective in LCA, which isn't there yet. But how does, in our case, biodiversity appears in practical cases with partners? It's usually through certification mechanisms. So instead of spotting one aspect of biodiversity that could be of interest for the company, it would be like for wood, for example. In one of our partners looked at the FSC certification or others, and then it becomes a criteria for purchasing wood that it does have that certification. But it's not something that's so straightforward, because we have many other discussions where, because when you take a certification as a criteria in your purchasing power, in your purchasing strategy, you buy a bundle of criteria, not just one. And therefore, you may be in a sort of a contradiction of some others, and you don't want to buy the bunch of criteria that comes with the certification. So there is an interesting debate and field of research there. So that, I think it's, and I will close with that, I think it's, there's a very good potential in purchasing strategies, procurement strategies, to handle biodiversity issues, to spot them and identify them through life cycle perspective or not necessarily, but still there is a problem of metrics that we have in other domains of when you want to handle and manage biodiversity. There is not this single ton of carbon or whatever, and it makes it more complicated in the company. And the second point that we're facing is that the understanding, the awareness of biodiversity issues are not yet as clear in companies, and that's the whole reason there of the center here. But it's still very true. We have a lot of training to do or awareness raising before it becomes fundamental in companies. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean-Pierre. Our next speaker is Philippe Tepper. He's a project coordinator for the Sustainable Procurement team at ICLEI. Philippe has long experience in international, European and national projects on green and sustainable public procurement, with a focus on developing research and guidance, criteria, and tools in the field of energy efficient buildings, social responsible public procurement, along supply chain, innovative approaches in public procurement, legal requirements and opportunities. And since 2008, he is the Procura Plus campaign manager and coordinates various international projects. And his background includes experience of more than 10 years in training and event management and European and international consultancy work using participative methodologies and approaches, and has formerly worked for European research organizations and NGOs, publishers, development organizations in Europe, Latin America, and the Higher Caucasus. Philippe. It's not giving me the closing. Do it this way. There we go. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the kind invitation to speak here today. I will present a bit what ECLA, Local Governments for Sustainability, has been doing and is doing and will do in terms of making sustainable public procurement a reality. My presentation is called the handy tool for achieving the aims of biological diversity. As discussed in previous sessions and also in plenaries, I think it came quite apparent as issues around biodiversity cannot be only seen solely in terms of nature conservation or biological aspects, but also the surroundings of the economic setups, but also the social setups. So I'm talking more about integrated aspects that lead also to the point that biodiversity and related ecosystem services are touched upon. ECLA, you may know, you may not know, is a leading network of local governments for sustainability. We are connecting leaders in sustainability with 12 megacities, 100 cities of several million inhabitants, and as are also medium-sized cities. So we are not only focusing on the big cities such as Mexico City, but also work a lot with the small cities. Me, especially as a trainer in sustainable public procurement, across Europe, I think I've seen all kind of small villages to the big cities and the procurement teams, and it's different challenges. But in the end, I think always after trainings came to this appropriate solutions for those teams, how to the next day start with sustainable public procurement. We are a network, like I said, with more than 1,100 members of cities, local governments worldwide. We work with within 15 offices. I myself come from the European Secretariat, have satellite offices too, more than 200 staff, and we have official representation role of the local governments at the UNFCCC, UNCBD, UNFCSD. So quite there presenting the voice of the cities, municipalities and their associations. In our mission, ECLA considers a sustainable city one that strives to reduce its per capita use of natural resources. We have talked about this quite some time here at the meeting too, and to a level that endangers neither local nor global ecosystems. And at the same time, we want to ensure that political, economic and social system guarantee a high quality of life for everyone. However, defining high quality of life might be different from one country to the other. So, going into the topic of sustainable public procurement and listing a series of benefits that you will achieve when starting on a journey towards making your purchases green, social, and economic sound. It's a clear tool that can be used to achieve your environmental targets. Especially at the city level, it's quite visible also. When you're talking about, for instance, construction or rehabilitation of sites, you can see the direct link to environmental conservation targets or having certain airflow corridors in the city with different planning systems. And what you will end up at the very end always is that somebody has to run a tender to provide a product, a service, or works. So at this very end, you will always enter into the public procurement field, and then also to achieve your environmental targets is quite handy. You can raise a lot of awareness, not only in the administration, but also the public sector with what you are purchasing,
It's easy. You can communicate it easily. You can achieve direct influence on the working conditions. You normally start with the working conditions of your employees or the service you are buying in. So, for instance, in the field of cleaning services. You assist disadvantaged groups in society. Public authorities meet also the bound of environmental, social, and ecological challenges they are facing. I guess many of our members say, of course, climate change adaptation or loss of biodiversity or both are key challenges they are facing at the moment. So it can be a tool for this. It's also quite important, and this comes from my experiences with the European Union, to look into existing and forthcoming legislation. So when looking into SPP, we have a process there that currently, for instance, the procurement directives in the EU are revised. I'm waiting any second that they are signed by Parliament. And this, if you know this already now, as a city, for instance, that there will become, you will have a new legislation very soon. It's quite handy to know what are the details. So we are helping them also to know very in advance what will come, and also to try to shape what is necessary in terms of sustainability. SPP, when you think about it as a more general thing, and also include not only product services that cost more because they are more sustainable, but integrate also a pure life cycle cost analysis. Then you will easily see you can spend money. eClay with its members are producing case study on this aspect every single year. We have a whole series of case studies. I think a wonderful example is, for instance, the city of Koling that has saved 10% of their purchases over 10 years annually. And that is, of course, a good sign also that this, in times of financial crisis, basically is a handy tool again. You are moving also in terms of ecosystem services, or in terms of more innovative products, bio-based products, for instance. The public authorities, if they have a certain purchasing power, can also be a driving pad for new technologies. We have in the EU, for instance, adopted a US concept of pre-commercial procurement more and more, also to work together with business to partly finance the development of new innovative technologies. This is a way also for biodiversity ecosystem services, I think. And finally, you can set a big example with this. So that's a whole list of benefits. Let's get into the more concrete ones. Cities such as Vancouver or Berlin are hotspots of biodiversity. So the city itself, with all the history, with all the different places, with all the climate zones, with different occupations, they are rich. So also what we see from our members, those cities take on responsibility for biodiversity. They are implementing policies, strategies, and laws to conserve biological diversity. And what we more and more see as in those laws or action plans, that they say, we have those targets, indicators, metrics, and so on to achieve, to reduce biological loss, and we have tools. And the number one tool is green public procurement that we are using. Sustainable procurement in the end so makes use of existing laws to conserve biodiversity. And I just want to give you also an example, I think especially for the interrelationship with businesses that in the end offer those services or works. We have to really think about to make our tender documents a bit more interesting to the business. I mean, if you go to a bookshop and you will see a book with the title Procurement. Okay. You will turn around and go to the book that says something about what you ever wanted to know about saving money. That's a good title. Yeah, that's a more interesting book. So make use of the so-called subject matter in technical terms of a tender, where you send a strong signal to the market that you only want sustainable product, services and works. You clearly say what you want. You don't want only a computer, but you want an energy efficient computer. You don't want only food and catering for a conference. You want that this food and catering meets certain criteria, for instance, to achieve your biodiversity targets. Make this clear from the beginning. The EU and also with a WTO GPA agreement, so that rules, basic principles for public procurement. We have this possibility that the subject matter is free to choose. Nobody can tell a city what they have to buy, only the procedure, how they buy it. So that's a strong recommendation from my side. You might question sustainability always costs more. But as I said, also you have to see it in an integrated aspect. And even taking a look into one clear example, I've just been talking about catering and food. Why to pay less, and as a result to get even less is my question here. Did you know that organic meat only loses 10 to 20% of its weight compared to non-organic meat that loses 40 to 60%? So basically what you are buying there with non-organic products is air. Water, yeah. You're buying water, that is, you're buying nothing. Think about also these terms. They are really good examples also from Germany, from canteens, from cooks that made really exercises with this, showed this towards the customers, showed this towards the people that have to sign off their bills and their spendings. So it's just one short and simple example to show what costs more doesn't need to be in the end more costly. Boost sustainable entrepreneurship. I already mentioned that public procurement can be a launching pad for new innovative technologies, for instance. We see more and more that cradle-to-cradle principles are implied along product development, so give a boost to those products. Demand this in your criteria. Encourage also renewable resource economics, so we've been talking a lot about circular economies. In public procurement you can make a lot of references to these circular economies, so that the supplier has to fulfill certain take-back criteria, reuse or remanufacturing criteria can be included. Eco-design, this relates a lot to the pre-commercial procurement aspects I've just talked about, and just also think broader and also demand products when we talk about biodiversity that are more bio-based, for instance plastics. Just three examples, three categories. We have a clear aim here, nature conservation. We have a measure, organic agriculture and food production. And for a procurer, it's quite easy because you have a lot of certificates that are there. Okay, it's not that easy. You have a lot. Okay, you need to know which are the certificates you can trust, which act as a good verification source also. But in the end, having certificates, standards, especially type 1 standards, is a very handy tool for a public procurer, like mentioned before also in the presentation. So we as the promoters of sustainable public procurement really encourage that those systems exist. They help a lot for the work of public procurers. Because as you can see here in the slide, you can use it as referring to the criteria of those. Of course, sometimes we don't want to have all, so we list those that we want to have. But we can have also use it as a direct verification, so a product in this case that has this label on can be easily checked. There are many cities around the world that take this approach and do this for their catering services for events. Just to list Rome, Barcelona, Malmö and Freiburg, but European focused. Timber, another straightforward example where you can just apply sustainable public procurement. you have, as a measure of sustainable forest management, I think it has been said here all across that there are good labels around, FSC, PEFC, just to name a few. You use the criteria of those and you use it again with the appendix or equivalent as for verification of in your contracts award. London, Vancouver, and Zagreb are among one of the cities in our networks that do this very intensively. Bio-based packaging, I just mentioned another example, reduce waste and use of, increase the use of natural, reduce the use of natural resources, sorry. So you are looking into substitutes for existing materials here. You are going into plastics made out of natural resources, of mice, of stock, recycled paper, cardboard. And you have also here in this case again the possibilities that there are standards and certifications around that help to make the life for public procurers easy. Toronto, Hamburg, Barcelona, some of the examples I know of. So just to come to an outlook, it's quite important also that public procurers themselves train themselves a bit more to understand what can be done when you're asking for greening a supply chain. So it really this understanding and this knowledge transfer from business to public procurers, I think I would encourage to go on, so that you're talking the same language. This is even more important when it comes to social aspects, but this is not so much the topic we have. The next point is we were talking about monetarizing emissions such as NOx, SO2 or CO2, and we see this more and more happening in the award of tenders. So basically that you is the example purchasing a mobility service. I'm not saying I'm purchasing a car, I'm purchasing a mobility service, and there's a clear reference to external costs in the tender. And this is by laws now possible in the EU, but not worldwide, to take a look into your laws. But we will see that this will happen, and also those externalities are internalized, like some speakers said also that this is necessary yesterday. And continue to drive innovation. Don't be shy to test out and pilot also certain products. Just test it out with bio-based packaging at your next event, or look into self-healing concrete or algal wastewater processing when you're talking about here about wastewater plants or construction. Just be open, be creative, and move ahead. And EKLA believes that mainstreaming sustainable supply chains by using the purchasing power of procurement will make the difference. So I just would like to invite you to join us on this mission. Here are some references, some websites, and also my email address. Thank you very much. And I have some postcards also here, they're on the table if you want.
Thank you very much, Philip. Our next presenter, our final presenter in this segment is Kerben Baker. Kerben is head of biodiversity planning at the National Department of Environmental Affairs in South Africa. He is responsible for mainstreaming biodiversity imperatives into national, provincial, and local planning processes and cross-sectorally. He champions the Business and Biodiversity Initiative and Valuation of Biodiversity in South Africa, has a Master's of Science degree in Biotechnology and a Master of Science degree in Resource Economics from the University of Kent in Canterbury. Kerben. There we go.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you. I'm just going to give you a perspective from South Africa, a national government perspective. The National Development Plan, which is a blueprint of our development for the next 20 years or so, up to 2030, acknowledges that government's procurement policies blur the line in matters of corruption, and the state procurement system has become overly bureaucratized. The emphasis on compliance by box ticking makes the system costly, burdensome, ineffective, and prone to fraud. From a regulatory perspective, the Public Finance Management Act, the PFMA of 1999, governs financial management practices in South Africa. And this is a decentralized system complemented by the Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, Preferential Procurement Framework Regulations, the National Treasury Regulations, and the Black Economic Empowerment Codes of Good Practice. Now, there's a lot of acronyms that I will be referring to, so just bear in mind that PPP is Preferential Procurement Policies, Black Economic Empowerment Code is BEE, so if you're getting a bit confused, I'll just repeat myself. Now, regarding preferential procurement policy, the Preferential Procurement Policy, PPP, the Framework Act gives effect to government's priority of empowering historically disadvantaged persons by giving them preferential treatment in procurement activities. Some of the implementation challenges that we have, a lack of effectiveness, and the challenges include limited capacity of the small suppliers, lack of controls and monitoring, no broad-based effect for historically disadvantaged individuals, empowerment versus enrichment, and price is still the dominant criterion. In terms of delivery, quality, reliability of BEE suppliers, there is slower delivery, the capability to deliver not guaranteed with BEE suppliers. There's a conflict between preferential public procurement versus quality focus, and cash flow problems of the small suppliers. Cost premium, it's increased cost, and the tight budgets versus BEE compromises on quality and price. It's the difficult management of the PPP, lacking understanding of BEE amongst the line management. There's no effective review of the impact of preferential public procurement, lacking access to the information on BEE compliance of companies. On fraud, some companies abuse the system and overstate their BEE compliance. There's a lack of monitoring and enforcement. In terms of regulation, it serves as an additional burden in terms of the procurement process. I mentioned this, the increased bureaucracy and the slower procurement processes, and procurement processes more complicated because of the preferential public procurement. On green procurement in South Africa, while green procurement is still a relatively new concept in South Africa, environmental criteria have, to a certain extent, started playing a role in public procurement decisions. For larger development projects, all state entities in South Africa already consider environmental criteria through environmental impact assessments that are required by the national law. Certain government bodies seem to have progressed in developing green procurement policies or complementary policies. The implementation of these policies, however, appears to be less than complete. Some of the barriers to green procurement in South Africa, it's lacking awareness, lack of the legal mandate and the political framework, the premium cost of green alternatives, identification of green alternatives, the unverified environmental claims and or ignorance of the GPP principles in procurement decisions. What is the kind of support that is needed based on the barriers? Training of officials and capacity building, initiatives to cooperate with national governments, the expert support and information and guidelines that are not available, awareness raising campaigns, identification of eco-friendly goods and access to databases, cooperation and networking, monitoring and or measurement system, and coming back to the business case and price, stakeholder engagement, and the creation of a green public support group or support unit. Sustainable public procurement in South Africa, some of the strengths. The social element of SPP has largely been implemented in South Africa due to the legal framework and drives the country's preferential procurement initiatives. Well-established verification schemes are in place for BEE. These are recognized as being credible and are accredited by the Association of BEE Verification Agencies. The rollout of Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act has been done effectively, with all the provinces and the municipalities taking responsibility for its implementation in the supply chain functions. While few government bodies have developed formal green procurement policies, there are a number of initiatives in place that support green procurement. While the organizations and initiatives that support SPP provide SPP support and consultancy-related services in South Africa are fragmented and many are sector-specific, they are established and are currently providing a valuable service. If they are coordinated effectively, national support could largely be provided by government bodies through these existing organizations and initiatives. With the current energy crisis in South Africa, there is momentum for the promotion of environmentally beneficial procurement practices that would assist in alleviating the crisis. Although the current databases that showcase green products and services might not yet be suited to serving SPP, many of them would be able to provide a platform from which an SPP database could be developed, and many have contacts with industry. Some of the weaknesses, SPP is not currently being driven by national government. It is a decentralized procurement process, and this has resulted in lost opportunities for collaborative tender and specification development and bidding. Few government bodies have any form of green procurement policies in place, and I think they are overridden by other perceived priorities. Very little formal environmental verification schemes currently exist, and there are challenges with auditing. The preferential public procurement has been rolled out effectively, but little monitoring to measure if it has any positive impact. Supply chain management decisions generally do not take the life cycle costing into account. There's not much awareness and expertise around sustainable procurement, public procurement. Many government departments are currently engaged in long-term contracts with their suppliers. The exit clauses do exist in the contracts, but this could impact on the long-term implementation of SPP. The current practice of fiscal dumping, that is the sudden spending of budgets at the financial year end, that takes place in many government bodies, is a reaction to the national government budgetary frameworks. While the medium-term expenditure framework, which allows for budgeting of projects over a 3-year cycle, should have partly alleviated fiscal dumping, by removing the threat of unspent budgets not being rolled over at the year end, it has in practice not done so. This is thought to be due to the fact that the consequences for under expenditure are more serious than those for frivolous expenditure. Certain government departments interpret national procurement legislation as preventing them from buying green products or services at a premium. Current reporting mechanisms are not robust enough to be able to identify and reward departments for savings through good demand management, and instead focus on initial capital cost. As a way forward, I mentioned our National Development Plan resonates a review of our procurement practices. The Vision 2030 calls for procurement systems that need to be robust, transparent, and sufficiently intelligent. Procurement decision-making should remain decentralized, but there is a central role in providing enabling structures. Designing procurement systems to deliver value for money and enable effective governance. Leverage the local procurement accord to promote stronger buyer-supplier relations and deeper localization. The public sector procurement will be leveraged to stimulate the local activity. The revised preferential procurement regulations of 2011 will promote transformation, aligning all the legislation and the codes and charters that flow from the BEE Act and advance the socioeconomic targets of the country. Now, some of the explicit direction from the National Development Plan on natural resources. It calls for an environmental management framework, a target for the amount of land and oceans under protection, and a set of indicators for natural resources. This is just some of the alignment of our policies to the sustainable development initiatives in the country. And it includes the medium-term strategic framework for the period 2014 to 2019. That's my story tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that concludes the presentations that we have this morning. I was a minute or two ago given the 5-minute signal to stop everything. So hopefully we can take a couple of questions, including if the panelists have any questions to ask each other as a result of listening to colleagues. I might start the ball rolling a little bit with a thought that has occurred to me during all of this, and it has to do with the tension between the adding of criteria to procurement contracts while being under pressure not to spend any more money. And I'm just wondering, I think I might ask Margaret this in the Canadian government context, whether in the past 6 or 7 years that you've been working in this area, whether you've noticed a shift in emphasis, or whether there's been a softening or a hardening of you can't spend any more versus yes, you have to add these green procurement criteria no matter what. And whether there's been a trend, whether you've noticed anything moving a little bit, or whether it's become even more difficult given the tough economic circumstances that we're having to deal with now.
Thank you for the question. It is an interesting thought, and I'm thinking back to when I started in this space about 6 years ago. There was a lot of talk about, oh, will it cost more, will it cost more? And it is a bit of a reoccurring question, although it's been, I haven't gotten that question in a while. It's slowly fading out, and I find procurement officers more and more are recognizing that this is something that they need to be concerned about, and that doesn't necessarily cost more. I've actually had a procurement officer tell me, I can't give too many specifics, but he was saying that he really appreciated including the environmental criteria in the standing offers because it meant that it just changed the conversation with the suppliers. And they found that they were working with suppliers that were better business partners for all kinds of issues, not necessarily directly related to the environmental criteria, but it was the environmental criteria that opened up that discussion for a bit more of a partnership and a bit more of a fruitful business relationship. I think anyone new to procurement or new to green procurement, I think it's something that each individual will go through, that there is still a sense that, oh, maybe it'll cost more, but there's more and more research coming out, more and more case studies that are showing that it can be cost neutral or it can even save money.
Thanks, Margaret. That's encouraging. Yes, sir.
Well, I want to follow up with that question. My name is JP Renault, and I've been working until recently for a large engineering company in Canada. So we do push tenders out to you guys to say, well, this is the work we'd like to do. And I was working as the head of sustainability with the business development team, who asks me those questions. Oh, the government, TPSGC is asking for this and that. And all they want usually is to slap on a green logo, what you guys are looking for too. So the kind of star energy equivalents, Energy Star equivalent for the engineering sector. So a GRI report or a signature to a international or local charter or something like that. But when it comes to actually offering better services, so helping you build a road from A to B that will not trample on wetlands, or trying to find better ways to insulate your buildings, things like that, well, yes, there is a price premium. And as Kieran was saying, the price premium is still key. In Quebec, we even have a law that forces public officers to go for the lowest bidder. The lowest bidder that passes the minimum standard. So that's like asking a class of graduates, an MBA class. As long as you all have 60% passing grade, we'll hire the lowest salary. What else can we do to differentiate ourselves in terms of providing more intelligent services?
It is.
Quick comment?
Sure.
Sorry about that.
Yes. It is an interesting question, and we're still a work in progress. There is a barrier study that's gone on to try and address some of those issues, and it is my main thought with that is that it's always a challenge for us to compare one company, one service provider to another without trying to give away while being fair, while being competitive. And so when we use these standards and kind of the checkbox, do you have LEED, do you have EP, do you have Energy Star, it's a way for us to be able to compare businesses that are very different from each other. And so it's something that we recognize that is not always perfect. And we do have initiatives. They've just recently changed their name. I think it's Build Innovation Program to look for the more innovative, the more front-running services and looking for those solutions. And there is a new trend, excuse me, there's a new trend now to look more strategically at goods and services and look for more holistic solutions-based approaches. But it's not an overnight process by any means. And there'll always be pockets where they aren't quite as far ahead.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm going to take one last question from the floor, but Philippe, if you had a very, very rapid response, we're going to be pushed out of here quickly.
There are good news from the EU. They are about to pass a new regulation, the procurement directives, and this gets rid of this principle of lowest price. It's no longer allowed to only have this. You have to go with the most economically advantageous tender via awarding in the EU. So this is to come any second now. It's with Parliament now. And also more and more we see also performance-based specifications coming up in the EU, especially in the field of construction and infrastructure, that says I want a service, or I want a road service, or I want a building that is 70% more energy efficient than the current standard. that's a performance-based specifications, but it's up to the offer, to the supplier, it's the one presenting the bid to show which technology or approach they are taking. So we see this more and more happening. We also see more and more happening in award criteria to boost innovation. So not only having minimum specifications and then awarding, but in the award criteria also addressing environmental points. And last but not least, I mentioned this PCP initiative that swapped over from the US to Europe. Pre-commercial procurement is coming more and more into focus also in Europe to just simply drive innovative ideas. It's clearly working with the business there to find the right solutions.
Braulio, last word.
Thanks, John. Just want to thank the panel for the very interesting presentation. I fully understand the difficulties are on how to operationalize these things. I fully understand it's a process. A question is about the ability so far to measure progress made, not only on progress, but outcomes. What can you tell me in terms of how do you measure, how do you assess real progress in implementing green procurements and the impacts that this has on the environment? Jean-Pierre mentioned the issue of metrics, which is critical for biodiversity. And I agree, but I think we have to make some progress. For example, the team you studied, they decided to go for just 4 or 5 major metrics to deal with the whole concept of biodiversity. I think that's the way we have to do. We have to be practical. But I would love to see some comments on the issue of actual impacts of implementing these.
Anybody? How do you measure how well you're doing? I emphasize we really have to be brief.
Okay, it is always difficult going from the principles of green procurement to very solid metrics of how many bees were saved or how much was the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions based on a criteria that was included in one of your procurement instruments. And it's an ongoing challenge that we have, and the way that we're looking at it right now is recognizing that green procurement is a contributor to reduced impacts, but we're not at this point looking to get hard numbers of X GHGs were reduced. We're looking more at how many purchases had included environmental criteria and how good are those criteria. And that's where our measurement is coming from right now.
Same thing. It's more in a sustainable, in a CSR perspective. Instead of, we don't look at impacts, we look at what is being done. So maybe also because the causality between changing attitudes and the real measure of the effects is not that clear. So we're really working on at behaviors, not on end of the line results, and I also agree on not measuring. Using metrics that are already there and pretty straightforward is better, and especially in life cycle assessment. What we were doing before on change of land use was very basic, but adding the effects of any activity on a few economic goods and services is already a progress, even if you don't do it on all the lists that you have in a TIB or Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. So that's the direction we're taking in life cycle assessment.
Actually, the question is currently key and discussed heavily at the European Union and also with exchange worldwide on practical solutions. I can just recommend you to take a look into Korea, and the company KIT, they have presented quite a very good database system they are using for this. It's a pragmatical, simplified system. Any scientist in the room might question certain things there, but it's working, and they got certain results and getting close to a number how much of their purchases are green. And like I said before, public procurers rely on certification and standards as a good source, but not for all product services works. It's suitable and also possible to have. So you need to then again work on the definition, what is your green product, or what is your biodiversity friendly product, service or works that you are purchasing on. Again, be more pragmatic here in the monitoring, because there's simply also, like said, for the government of Canada, there's no additional resources to do this type of thing. So it's also about organizations like ICLEI or others to form up international projects in this regards, which we have done. There's a postcard on this. It's so far more on carbon measuring, but it's quite a keystone that big purchasing organizations that will spend in 3 years 3.5 billion euro in their purchases. It's 18 partners, and for each of the purchases we have data on how much CO2 and equivalents are saved. You could amend this approach, of course, with other indicators easily once it's more established, but it's just taking a look into the past tender and the now actual tender, and it's a very important aspect to have more data on this.
Thank you. Thank you all. Help me thank our panel one last time.